Good day. Today we're going to review and pick up where we left off with discretionary access control. In our last class, we showed you this screen with 4 different types of access control policies, but we want to call out that there's actually a 5th that we'd like to review in our study guide. So before we get into that, I just wanted to state that discretionary access control is where a user decides and exercises discretion about who gets what kind of permissions. And typically, that's a mandatory part of sharing resources or providing resources to others from a Linux environment. Mac users and Windows users simply uh, often operate by accepting the defaults. They don't make any changes. They don't make any intentional decisions about what permissions are assigned where. So it's important to understand that discretionary access control can be performed in a Windows environment or Mac environment. It's just not commonly practiced. In Linux, you have no choice. So if we look at our study guide in Student Learning Objective E, we do make mention of the other access control method that we'd like you to understand. So we have a screen here. Yeah, the 4 that are listed by the textbook author, slides are a little outdated. Discretionary access control, then role-based access control, MAC, and ABAC. We've already discussed what those are. It's ICAM that's the 5th environment. Microsoft has launched a new platform with this 5th access control method in mind. It's called Microsoft Entra, E-N-T-R-A. Whenever you have government environments where a brokered or federated trust and authentication method provides access to a wide and varied range of constituents, like private citizens and government employees and civic leadership and public safety. This goes beyond single sign-on, like for our My Campus portal, where you enter a single password and it allows you access to multiple systems within the same environment. This is extended beyond that so that resources within different environments belonging to different domains or enterprises, the authentication and access can be brokered through this global access control solution. And so ICAM is what we're talking about. And if you go to Bing or Google and you type in Microsoft Entra, you'll see that there's all sorts of interesting information about how to use Entra to provide authentication and then access control components across and between entire enterprises. So it's very different besides the single sign-on we experience with the My Campus portal. In any case, just remember that this slide needs to be updated by the textbook publishers, by the author, to include ICAM. What we'd like to do now is touch on the role-based access. We were in here last time talking about the discretionary access that we use with a command to set up, and you do have the option to connect to in your discretionary access solution, you can do additional but similar work in the Unix or Linux environment and double the credit that you have. So if you're looking at the first Module 3 solution, what you'll see, and here's the single sign-on. This is not an example of ICAM because we're within the same organization. If we are looking at Module 3 in the 3.2 solution, you do have an opportunity to double the credit that you log. So you would perform the discretionary access control solution within your own laptop or your Server 2022 virtual machine. And that's all you're required to do for the discretionary access solution. However, you can create a Linux virtual machine or work within a Mac terminal and perform the same tasks, but in that environment. And at the end of this recording, I'll show you how to quickly jumpstart. There's a Debian download. It's about 388 megabytes last time we checked. And it's a very quick, efficient way to provide a Linux terminal where you can noodle around with things. Let's finish our overview of role-based access control. So one of the things that's important to understand about role-based access control is that it centers on a role, and that involves other stakeholders. And once a role is defined, a user group or a security group, is created that tracks with that role. And this is especially true even in the case that an individual user has a unique role in an organization. Now, what happens with IT staff is they often think, well, this is a waste of time. I'll just assign the permissions and privileges to a range of data and resources based on the user account. The problem with that approach is that when users are transferred or promoted or they resign, they are separated from the organization, they're either fired or they resign to take a better job. When they leave the organization, the next person that's coming in to take over, you have to work their independent user account permissions and privileges, and it's just really tedious. However, if you create a security group or a user group, so we say user group in Linux or security group in Windows, based on the role. So let's say we have a role that has to do with bookkeeping. The role would literally be called bookkeeping, and the group created would literally be called bookkeeping. So you can have the same group names as you do file system objects, and everything in that directory for bookkeepers is tied to that group. And then as individuals are part of that group or leave the group, you can add the user to the user group or security group. And with a single action, you can completely change a full range of access to applications and data for a given position. So the role is assigned to an individual or removed from an individual by adding or deleting a user from the user or security group. Now, every time we say user, we mean user group or security group. It is extra legwork, and so users have to be willing to share how and what their roles do. IT staff have to be willing to create the user groups or security groups for each of those roles. But on the front side, if it's done correctly, it saves so much legwork, and there are so many fewer complications. So especially when you have one user assigned to a role, you never want direct access to the resources for that role. Here you see a diagram of that very thing from the textbook. The users have access to the roles, and how that is implemented in Windows or Linux is that a user group or security group is created for the specific role. I mean, this example is generalized, but if these were students, you don't see anybody directly accessing the resources. They are members of the security groups. When they change, you simply take them out of one group and put them in another group. So if we were to give you a quick example of what this means, this is how it would look. A security group in Windows or a user group in Linux is created for the given role, and it should be named so that it's obvious and intuitive what group that belongs to in terms of the role. The permissions and access rights are set up for the created group. A subject or user account is added or removed from the group. So when the role assignments change, the group membership is changed accordingly. So for the example here, we're saying a member of the HR staff. HR means human resources. Let's pretend that they're promoted to HR director. That's a role change. So all we have to do is remove them from the HR staff group and add them to the HR director group. If we do this right, that means that the temporary or permanent promotion, right, will be in place, and all it takes is one command, one action. And then if the previous director is removed, then their access is removed because they're no longer in that role. Okay, what we'll do now is review the additional measures you can work through to create a quick virtual machine with a Linux environment. There's a couple of quick pointers and tips that'll get you through this. If you click here on using this link to download and install the media, you'll have it in your downloads folder. I typically transfer this out to a temp folder or a VHD folder, an ISO folder. So yeah, that's what we'll do. I'll go ahead and, for now, we'll put it in the temp folder. So I'm going to take my Debian download, which is 388 megabytes, and that's version 11.6.0. I'll put it in the temp folder, and then I'm ready to get started with So now we're ready to get started with VirtualBox. We open up VirtualBox, and we'll be creating a new virtual machine. So we'll go to the machine menu and select new. If you type in Debian just as a name for the virtual machine, I like having a dedicated directory on a separate disk for virtual machines, so I'll select the VM option. Here you would probably put this in a directory off of your C drive or inside your temp folder. I'm going to point to that ISO that's sitting in the install media that's sitting inside the temp folder. So I'll navigate to my C drive temp directory and select the install media. As soon as you do that, you'll notice that the type and the version change. You absolutely want to select skip unattended installation. There's an automatic wizard that runs, and sometimes it hangs. I'm going to change some quick settings just to make sure that this will run faster and more reliably, so it doesn't take as much time. Inside systems, I don't want it to boot from the floppy. I'll give it extra memory if I have extra memory, but you can leave it at 2. I'll give this 4. I'm going to increase the number of CPUs to 2. For display, I'll maximize the video memory just so I have more display resolution, and I'll select the box to enable 3D acceleration. If you change any settings on your system and you notice that a yellow triangular exclamation point appears, it means you have to put the setting back. I'll leave my network setting to NAT for now so that it can connect to the internet, but I'll worry about that later. With Debian, there aren't as many drivers, or the range of functionality isn't as robust because this is a scaled down distribution. So I'll just leave this the way it is. I'll say OK, and then I'll go ahead and start my virtual machine. I'll hit enter to start a graphical installation. I can minimize this. Once I've installed the operating system, I can change the resolution. One thing you'll notice is that sometimes the mouse works, but then later in the installation it may not. So you have to be able to use some keys. If you use the tab key, you'll notice that this button becomes highlighted. So we'll talk about that, and you'll see that again later on when I lose my mouse pointer, if I lose my mouse pointer. I'll press continue for US and American English, and it's detecting the hardware and starting. And after a short while, it'll start to prompt to ask questions about the hard disk and other options. One frustrating part about working with a very light, very limited Linux version is to experience a blackout screen. What will happen is that later during this installation process, you may notice that this window showing the Debian install will turn black completely. You'll click into the black and hit the enter key, and the screen will reappear. But otherwise, everything else short of that doesn't reappear, and you think you've lost your machine. I'll accept the hostname Debian. I'm not worried about a domain name right now. But for this root password, I want to be sure that I have something I can remember well, and it's complex. So I will use something that I log so that I don't have problems. And then I'll press continue. The new username, I'll choose to use, I'll configure a user after a high school friend of mine named Mortimer. And I'll hit continue. Now the username for the account that's created based on the label with a capital M is lowercase Mortimer. Now that's really important to understand later. You'll see Mortimer with a capital M on the screen and click to log in, but once you're inside in the terminal command line environment, it'll be lowercase, and commands and other details are case sensitive in Linux. I'm going to go ahead and click continue. I will enter a password for Mortimer, the new user. And again, this will be something that I am confident I can duplicate again. I'll go ahead and click continue, and what you'll see here is that there are a few options for time zone, but if you're in the US Virgin Islands during half of the year during the summer, that matches Eastern. You'll have a chance to change that to Atlantic Standard Time later. I click continue, and then Debian starts to work with the Debian install program starts to work with the media to start loading this into virtual machine. I want to use the entire disk that was allocated for this. The default was 20 gigabytes, and these are dynamically sized. You can choose an option in advanced for setup for dedicated, which it'll basically reserve 20 full gigabytes in one file, which means your Debian performance and the virtual machine loads will happen much quicker. I just use the default settings here, and that's fine for you for this because we just want to have a Linux screen to work with. So I'm going to click continue. I'll select the 20 gig hard disk that it automatically creates for me, and I want all the files in one partition, and I want to finish and write the changes to the disk, and it says write changes to the disk. I'm going to say yes. You have to select yes and then click. Again, if you lose your mouse, you can use the tab key and arrow keys on your keyboard to change the highlight. If you hit the space bar, it'll select the item that's highlighted. So if you have to move that radio button from yes to no or no to yes, then you use tab and arrows until it's highlighted, and then you hit the space bar. This will install the base system, and this will run for quite a while. I'm going to go ahead and hit the pause button. If we get a black screen, I'll demonstrate how to clear that. But basically all you do at this point is respond to the few default screens that are remaining. You'll see some other things coming up. It's going to ask about other features or functionality for the operating system. Avoid selecting extras at this point. You just want a basic Linux system. So we'll be back in just a moment, and you'll be able to watch the rest of the install after it connects online and starts downloading components from the internet. So here we've reached a screen where it says scanning your installation media finds the label. You now have the option of scanning additional media for use. I don't want to scan for more media, so I'll just accept no and click continue. I'll accept United States for the package manager. That's what loads the software. I'll pull from the default setting for Debian, although you can pick something that's closer, and as we look at the list, I can't see anything off the top of my head that would be closer, so we'll accept. And plus, this is the added advantage here is that if you're pulling straight from the source, you're getting the most current. There is no proxy to get out to the internet, so I'll click continue, and then the package manager will start checking to see where to get additional components online. We'll pause this again until we get to the next screen. This may take a while, and it says basically retrieving file 1 of 1, but at some point that's going to increase dramatically. I don't think it'll be and there's another section where the progress bar includes over 1,000 files, and it just takes a while. So you'll see this cycle multiple times. You'll think you're almost done. You just have to be patient. We'll pause this and then come back in a minute. There we go. It's retrieving file 1 of 1 again. This is another screen that'll pop up. It'll talk about configuring popularity contest. We don't want that. We'll just accept continue. And when the select and install software option appear, if you select any of these items, it'll go out and find all kinds of stuff to download. Typically a web server or SSH server for remote secure login is a good option to have, and SSH doesn't take a lot of extra. So that might be a cool thing to do if you want to run yours remotely from a distance, or you want to host websites and pages. But I'm just going to leave this the way it is and click continue. And then this is where, yeah, over 1,000 files are loading. It'll appear to take just a minute or so, but then that'll fluctuate. It'll turn into 5 minutes, and then 3 minutes, and then 10 minutes. It'll bounce back and forth. That's normal. See, here's 27 minutes. Now it's down to 6 minutes again. You just need to leave it run. It's probably good if you can do this on a network where no one else is using the internet, or few people are using the internet while you're loading this. I'm going to go ahead and hit the pause button again so we can finish the installation in a minute and show you how to open up your CLI terminal so that you can log extra credit by implementing a discretionary access control solution in the same manner that you did with your Windows system. So here we see there was a black screen. I moved the mouse in here. If your mouse loses its contact with the inside environment of the virtual machine, all you have to do is click with, slide your pointer over a couple of inches, not very far, but slowly about halfway across, right? Just kind of gauge, and then click with the left mouse button, and then hit enter on your keyboard, and you should get the screen back. That's what you see here. We are almost done. So we'll have a login where we can start to work discretionary access control. You can create an additional user or create groups. You can also, when we configured this, there was a root access or super user and then Mortimer. So you can work with the levels that are included, or add an additional user, create a different group, and then complete the exercise that way. We'll pause again until we get a login screen. Select and install software portion has completed. Now you'll see something about install the grub bootloader. You want to respond yes to that. And then click continue. This is what allows the system to boot. You have to enter the device manually, and if you don't have a mouse to work with, you can hit the down arrow and then the tab key until continue is highlighted, and then hit enter. That will install the grub bootloader so that your Debian Linux virtual machine can start up. You see here it's finishing the installation, removing temporary files, and so on. We'll have a login screen shortly. Here you see it says installation is complete, so it's time to boot into your new system. Make sure to remove the installation media so that you boot into the new system rather than restarting the installation. Most of the time when you click continue, that works, but you can go in here into machine settings, then go into storage, and then you can check to see if there is something loaded in here. You should be able to remove that if that's in there, but in any case, this version of the distro doesn't afflict you that way. It says empty, so there is none. I'll cancel this, and I'll click continue, and it should reboot. and then give us a login. So at this point I'm going to hit enter, and it'll load the standard option. One other thing I'll do is use the right mouse button once I have a graphical desktop to work with, and once that graphical environment is showing after I log in, I'll use the right mouse button and a context sensitive menu will appear, right? So you can work on display settings to change those. In fact, you might even be able to access it now. Actually, I was out here in Windows when I did that. So I want to hit enter and then put in my password for Mortimer. And I'll go ahead and enter that. So with a successful login, I've got a small desktop to work with, but I can right-click this and change the display settings. I'll pick something that fits well within the limited display area of my laptop. It needs to be something that has smaller resolution than the total space for my laptop. My laptop uses 1920 by 1080. I'll use 1440 by 900, or actually something a little more modest. 1280 by 768 wouldn't be bad. If I apply this, you'll see that I have a little more real estate. I'll keep the changes, and then I can close this screen, right? Go to activities. At this point, if I click down here, I should be able to find terminals in the somewhere in the mix here, or I can just click type to search and enter terminal. Once terminal is open, I can enter sudo su to enter the root password so that I can update, add users, create groups, change permissions with chmod, and so on. This concludes our build of the Debian virtual machine. Be sure to, I would suggest that you do run, you'll get this screen when it's prompting you for the sudo or sudo password, sudo. When you enter that, your command prompt will change to a £. I've got that. I'll try that at another time or two until I get a £. You'll want to issue the apt-get command to update and then upgrade. We've covered this in another video. We won't do that here. Thank you for joining us, and good luck with your alternate solution and additional credit. We'll see you in the next class.